If fighting ever begins again on the Korean peninsula, North Korean armour will not have the freedom to move wherever it wants. Korea is a country of steep mountains, narrow valleys, dense urban areas, and limited routes suitable for large armoured formations. That terrain naturally channels and tanks, infantry, and fighting vehicles towards the roads, bridges, and predictable avenues of approach. I've talked about Korean armour on my channel before, including the Black Panther, and it's interesting to see that now that the conversation of drones and anti-tank guided missiles are so prevalent, that South Korea is certainly getting with the times with a very formidable anti-tank weapon. Waiting around some of those routes I mentioned could be a small South Korean infantry team's opportunity, I guess, when carrying a weapon specifically developed to stop them in these choke points. That weapon we're talking about today is the AT-1K Raybolt, known in South Korea as the Hyeon-gung. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, I don't speak South Korean. It's a modern, man-portable fire-and-forget anti-tank guided missile designed to attack armoured vehicles from the front, side, or, most importantly, from above. Now, I know you're all looking at the screen saying, well, at first glance, the Raybolt looks like the South Koreans' answer to the American Javelin, somewhat of a copy, so to speak, or maybe the Israeli Spike. That comparison certainly is fair when you take a first glance because it's combining the imaging infrared seeker, the top attack capability, and the tandem-shaped charge warhead in a relatively compact infantry weapon. The more interesting story, however, is why South Korea decided it needed to build one for itself, and why the missile actually really works very well for them. And whether it can actually genuinely compete with some of the best anti-tank weapons out there, which particularly of today with Ukraine, the Javelin has certainly taken that forefront. South Korea has spent decades preparing for a type of war that many other countries consider increasingly unlikely. North Korea still maintains a very large armoured force, including enormous numbers of tanks, armoured personnel carriers, self-propelled guns, and of course, all other tracked vehicles. Many of these are based on older Soviet and Chinese designs, but North Korea has continued to modify them with additional armour, reactive protection, and new weapons and improved electronics. The age of many North Korean vehicles should not be confused with harmlessness, and this is what I find fascinating when we talk about North Korea. People think it's just going to be a cakewalk. An old tank can still be extremely dangerous to infantry, particularly when supported by artillery, drones, engineers, and dismounted troops. And Korea, both South and North, are focusing heavily on drone warfare, so when you have an armoured force that has significantly larger levels of drones to support them, you can't really put aside armour anymore. The numbers really do matter here though, folks. Even a technologically superior military can be placed under considerable pressure when large formations begin to advance along several routes at once. For many years, South Korean infantry relied on weapons such as the American TOW missile and the M40 106mm recoilless rifle. Both provided useful anti-armour capability, but they came from an earlier generation of warfare. The recoilless rifle is powerful, but it's pretty large, it's very visible, and when fired, increasingly limited against heavily protected vehicles. Early TOW systems offered much greater accuracy and range, but the operator must continue tracking the target while the missile is in flight. Some people debate the wire-guided missile is actually one of the more prominent anti-tank weapons of today, particularly that are being used in Ukraine, because there's no real way to stop it hitting you, whether it be jamming or countermeasures, unless you can't see the target. That means remaining behind an exposed system or site until impact can take several seconds depending on the distance, and on modern battlefields today, several seconds is a very long time. The launch signature may be detected almost immediately, and the target could return to fire, and nearby infantry could obviously engage the missile team, or a drone observing the area could direct artillery onto the position. A guided missile that allows the operator to fire and immediately move has offered major improvements in survivability for anti-tank teams of today. Now, the development of the Raybolt began in the late 2000s, with South Korea's Agency for Defense Development working alongside the LIG NEX-1 and other domestic defense companies. The program aimed to replace older anti-tank weapons while giving South Korea control over the technology, production, and future development of its own home-built guided missile. That domestic element is very, very important. South Korea had already become highly capable at producing tanks, artillery systems, warships, and aircraft, but modern fire-and-forget missiles require several difficult technologies to work together. These systems are very complicated. The seeker must identify and remain locked onto the target. The guidance system must control the missile throughout its flight without interruption. The warhead must defeat the reactive armor before penetrating the vehicle beneath it. The launcher must remain light enough for infantry to use while also surviving rough handling and difficult weather. And of course, be cheap enough to produce in mass volumes. The Raybolt completed development and entered production during 2017, becoming South Korea's first domestically developed third-generation anti-tank guided missile. It is now used by the Republic of Korea Army and the Marine Corps with both dismounted and vehicle-mounted configurations available. The basic infantry system consists of the observer and the launch unit connected to a missile contained inside a disposable launch tube, just like the Javelin. Publicly available figures generally place the missile in its complete firing system setup as a region of around 20 kilograms, while the missile itself weighs approximately 13 kilograms. It's certainly not light, but certainly a lot better than a recoilless rifle. That makes it portable, although describing any modern anti-tank missile as lightweight is really needing your own perspective. 20 kilograms may sound manageable until the soldiers carrying it have personal weapons, ammunition, body armor, radios, batteries, etc., etc. The additional missile rounds is also very critical here, because once you launch these missiles, you have exposed yourself to whichever armoured force is coming at you, and if it's a North Korean armoured force, there's going to be lots of eyes watching you, so you need to have the logistics and resupply of these missiles to keep firing. Now, because it is a fire and forget missile, it allows the operators to disband and move from the location and set up again, which is the key advantage of this system. However, the operator does have no further control once it's launched, so the missile may or may not track onto different targets, particularly when there is a large armoured force. Being there is no fibre optic link allowing the target to be changed in terms of priority, potentially a C2 node or artillery systems that could be part of a battle group you're engaging, the aiming point cannot be adjusted and the engagement cannot be cancelled. That distinction becomes important when comparing Raybolt to members of the Spike missile family, which is the latest generation of missiles. Several Spike variants allow an operator to observe the seeker's view of flight, and then, of course, depending on the version, the operator can redirect the missile to select a different target or strike something hidden beyond the original line of sight. Raybolt, of course, is a lot simpler of an engagement. Find the target, achieve a lock, select the attack mode, and fire. It does reduce the operator's workload and allows them to move on immediately, but provides less flexibility once the missile is airborne. For South Korea, personally, I think this makes sense. They don't need to be tracking long-distance engagements. They're going to be attacked at mass, and they just need as many missiles being launched at once, relocate so they're not getting blasted themselves, and continue going. Top attack mode, of course, is the most closely associated with the modern tank hunting strategy of anti-tank guided missiles. After the launch, the missile climbs above the operator's line of sight before descending towards the roof of the target, which, of course, for Soviet design and Chinese design tanks, you're not going to be surviving that. This matters because a tank cannot be equally protected in every single direction. The heaviest armor is generally concentrated across the frontal arcs, where the vehicle is most likely to receive direct fire. Raybolt uses a tandem high-explosive anti-tank warhead. The first charge is designed to initiate or disrupt the explosive reactive armor. A second, larger-shaped charge then forms the high-velocity metal jet, intended to penetrate through the main armor beneath it. The publicly stated performance figures claim penetration of approximately 900mm of rolled homogeneous armor, and after reactive armor has been defeated. As with almost every published missile penetration figure, that number should be treated carefully. Real tanks do not consist of a single vertical steel plate. They are modern protection systems, including composite armor, different angles, space layers, reactive elements, etc. So it's hard to say unless you have a laboratory penetration figure of exactly what the warhead performance can do. However, 900mm rolled homogeneous, or a foot of concrete like this bunker, is still pretty impressive. The effective range is approximately 2.5 kilometers. That places it in the same general infantry anti-tank category as the original Javelin and the Spike MR. It provides enough reach to cover roads, valleys, river crossings, and support defensive positions without requiring much larger launchers and support equipment associated with long-range missiles. A soft launch system ejects the missile from the tube just like Javelin before the main motor ignites. It reduces the immediate blast around the firing position and can allow the weapon to be fired from more confined locations than the older rocket systems, providing the crew with the necessary safety procedures. Raybolt's strength for Korea is definitely a strong contender, however, it does have some challenges. It largely comes from the seeker and its limited range. The missile has to lock onto a suitable infrared image before firing, meaning smoke, dust, rain, thermal camouflage, and complicated backgrounds can make target identification more difficult, particularly in a very clustered environment of targets. Its range of around 2.5 kilometers is, of course, very useful, but modern long-range systems can reach much further. In open terrain, a Raybolt team may still be within the range of tank guns, automatic cannons, artillery, or anti-tank weapons. And active protection systems are another growing challenge. Systems such as Trophy can detect and intercept incoming missiles, and Top Attack makes Raybolt harder to defeat, but it doesn't make it immune. Of course, North Korea doesn't have Trophy, but let's not kid ourselves. China and Russia are certainly going to be developing their own systems that North Korea will certainly benchmark from. Ukraine has shown that anti-tank missiles remain effectively at extreme close ranges, particularly in urban environments. But it's also demonstrated how dangerous the battlefield has become for missile teams. Drones can locate firing positions, track crews, and direct artillery onto them within minutes, and a lot of footage that I've seen have noted that the first portion of the Ukraine war has certainly been the anti-tank focus, but nowadays that has changed. A lot of the armoured force has been taken out, and they're going back into the drone capability. Conceal and rapid deployment of these systems is very, very important, and electronic discipline are now just as important as the missile itself. Drones can also make Raybolt more effective by detecting armoured vehicles before they enter the missile range. This allows the crew to prepare the launcher, select a firing position, and spend less time exposed while searching for the target. Future versions of Raybolt are expected to focus on greater range, improved seekers, and close integration with vehicles. There's certainly going to be a lot of discussion as to whether or not this system could be modified to the Spike kind of setup, I guess, with drones, or being somewhat of its own drone and digital surveillance as it flies through the sky and finds targets, and pass on that information to command networks. These upgrades, though, will become increasingly important as tanks receive better reactive armor, drones are starting to identify missile positions even better, and active protection and thermal countermeasures are being pushed into North Korean armored fleets. Raybolt is becoming an important export weapon. Saudi Arabia has operated this system, while the Philippines has selected it for its armored forces. But let's be honest here, South Korea has earned a very strong reputation lately for offering modern equipment at competitive prices with reliable production and relatively fast delivery. Which, let's be honest, if you have an entire nation north of you that wants you dead, you're going to want to have that very, very fast. The Raybolt, of course, though, does not introduce a completely new way of destroying tanks. Javelin and Spike established many of these capabilities a lot earlier. Its importance, though, comes from the South Korean development of technology that is domestically made and turning into a very credible operation and export system for other nations who may not have the same budget or standing with the United States. For a soldier carrying it, the rest is a real test of reliability. How long and how well this system can be used for depends on whether it is very well tested in battle conditions, which unfortunately at the moment it has not been. Javelin and Spike certainly have. The missile must survive the harsh conditions, particularly in Korea, damp, moist, and heat, and it must be able to detect targets and achieve and lock on and strike accuracy very quickly when needed, if required. And I'm going to say this because I do believe South Korean equipment, electronics, etc. is of high quality. I don't think they're going to have too much of a concern if they have to go hot with these weapons on actual engagements. And if it did become battles within the Korean Peninsula where terrain could funnel entire armoured formations into predictable routes, that capability could have an impact far greater than the size of the missile itself, being able to engage through different areas in those roads, valleys, urban areas with this kind of missile. Yeah, you're certainly going to be stopping a lot of that North Korean force. But what do you think of this missile? I'd love to hear your opinion. Maybe you're just saying, oh, it's just a copycat of the Javelin, and in some regards it kind of is. But again, the focus comes back to the boring side of weapon systems. Mass production, cheap, and can they be actually battle-proven and hardened in combat? It's hard to say nowadays, but with this one, I think in the fact that it is very close to Javelin, it probably could be. And I do have zero condoning of combat or war. But if it comes to it, and North Korea does start going in towards South Korea, I do believe this missile is going to do very, very well for itself. But maybe you have a different opinion, you know a little bit more than I do. Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and I will see you on the next one. All the best, folks. Bye-bye.